The night the millionaire nearly lost everything. No one in the grand dining hall noticed the danger, because the man sitting alone could not hear the warning that was rushing toward him. Yet fate had prepared a messenger no one would have believed. Not a security guard, not a doctor, not a trusted friend. It came through the tiny hands of a cleaning lady's baby, whose impossible act would change two broken lives forever. Rain struck the towering glass windows of the luxurious Hawthorne Grand Hotel, like restless fingers. The city outside glowed with wealth and movement, but inside the private dining wing, silence wrapped itself around one man more heavily than the expensive suit on his shoulders. Adrian Mercer, a deaf millionaire whose name appeared in business magazines and financial headlines across the country, sat alone beneath crystal chandeliers, surrounded by polished silver and untouched elegance. People admired Adrian's success, but rarely understood the loneliness behind it. At 48, he owned technology companies, luxury properties, and investment firms worth hundreds of millions. His face carried confidence the world respected. Yet his eyes often revealed something money had never managed to purchase: peace. Adrian had not been born wealthy. He had grown up in hardship, raised by a widowed mother who worked endless hours in a textile factory. When illness stole most of his hearing at the age of 9, life became cruel in ways few around him understood. Children mocked him, teachers pitied him, even relatives whispered about how limited his future would be. But hardship hardened into determination. He learned to read lips, studied harder than everyone around him, and buried his pain beneath discipline. Years later, his software ideas transformed into businesses, and those businesses transformed into an empire. The world called him brilliant. Still, success carried a hidden price. His mother had passed away before seeing his greatest achievements. Relationships failed because people either worshipped his wealth or grew frustrated by the communication barriers he carried. Eventually, Adrian stopped trying. It felt safer to build walls than risk heartbreak again. And so he dined alone. If you believe kindness and second chances still matter in this world, take a moment to like this video. Comment where you're watching from. Share this story with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional journeys like this one. That evening, Adrian had chosen the Hawthorne Grand not for pleasure but habit. The hotel's private dining room gave him distance from attention. Staff knew him well enough to avoid unnecessary interaction, and he preferred it that way. But on the lower floors of the same hotel, another life struggled beneath circumstances far removed from luxury. Marisol Vega arrived shortly after sunset, wearing a faded housekeeping uniform and carrying her sleeping baby against her chest. Marisol was 27, exhausted beyond her years, and surviving one impossible day at a time. Her husband had died in a construction accident nearly a year earlier, leaving behind debt, grief, and their infant son, Mateo. Since then, life had become a battlefield. Day shifts cleaned offices. Evening shifts cleaned hotel corridors. Nights disappeared into worry about rent, formula, and overdue bills. Babysitters cost more than she earned, and family support barely existed. Some nights, when no choice remained, she brought Mateo to work and prayed management would not notice. The hotel tolerated her only because she worked harder than almost anyone else. Mateo, barely 11 months old, had become her quiet companion through hardship. He was unusually observant, with wide, dark eyes that seemed to study people more deeply than most adults did. That night, rain and transportation delays forced Marisol to bring him again. She secured Mateo inside a small stroller and began cleaning executive hallways, while guests enjoyed luxury she could scarcely imagine. Hours passed. Upstairs, Adrian reviewed business documents between courses. His security team waited outside the private dining suite, but he preferred minimal intrusion. He noticed movement, occasionally waiters crossing, staff cleaning corners, but nothing held his attention for long. Until he saw her. Marisol appeared briefly near the hallway entrance, pushing her stroller while carrying cleaning supplies. Adrian noticed her not because she was extraordinary in appearance, but because she looked painfully tired. Their eyes met only for a second. She quickly looked away. People often reacted strangely around wealth. Some stared too long. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Adrian was used to it. But he noticed something else. The baby, Matteo, sat awake, watching the dining room with curious fascination. Adrian almost smiled. Children never cared about status. For reasons he could not explain, the sight reminded him of photographs his mother kept from his childhood before sickness, before silence, before ambition consumed tenderness. He returned to his meal, outside the suite. However, something darker had begun unfolding. A recently hired kitchen employee named Curtis had accumulated gambling debt connected to dangerous people. Desperate and frightened, he had accepted money to tamper with Adrian Mercer's meal. The plan was simple. A severe allergic reaction triggered by contaminated ingredients would appear accidental. No gun, no violence. Just tragedy disguised as misfortune. Curtis had already acted, and now fear was eating him alive. He watched from the service corridor, sweating beneath fluorescent lights, praying events would move quickly enough to erase suspicion. Inside the dining room, Adrian remained unaware. Because he could not hear, he relied heavily on visual awareness. Yet danger often arrives disguised as normality. Marisol continued cleaning nearby corridors. Matteo had grown restless. She paused beside the private wing entrance to soothe him, whispering softly while checking the hallway for supervisors. That was when Matteo saw Adrian again. The child leaned forward suddenly. His small hands gripped the stroller rail. Marisol tried calming him, but instead of settling, he became strangely agitated. His gaze remained fixed toward the dining suite. Then something unexpected happened. Matteo began crying with unusual urgency. Not ordinary discomfort, not hunger, a sharp, desperate insistence. Embarrassed, Marisol attempted moving away. Wealthy guests complained easily, and she feared attracting trouble. But Matteo fought against the stroller straps. Before she understood what was happening, he twisted free enough to knock over her cleaning bucket. Water splashed across polished marble. Startled, Marisol lunged to stop the spill. In that chaotic second, Matteo slipped partially from the stroller and crawled toward the open dining doorway. Everything happened at once. One waiter stepped aside. A security guard turned. Marisol gasped, and Matteo crawled directly toward Adrian Mercer. Adrian looked up, surprised. The child moved with startling determination. Then, just as Adrian reached toward the little boy instinctively, Matteo grabbed the edge of the tablecloth. Crystal glasses trembled. Silverware rattled. And Adrian's dinner plate crashed violently to the floor. The room froze. Security surged forward. Marisol's face drained of color. She expected outrage, termination, humiliation. Instead, something far stranger unfolded. The shattered dish released a sharp chemical odor. One of the waiters recoiled. Another stared downward in confusion. Adrian noticed expressions changing rapidly. He could not hear their voices, but he recognized alarm. Hotel management arrived within moments. Security restrained access, and then a horrifying discovery emerged. Laboratory testing later confirmed traces of a substance capable of triggering lethal allergic shock. The contamination had been deliberate. If Matteo had not pulled the tablecloth when he did, Adrian would likely have eaten the next bite. Silence swallowed the room. Marisol shook uncontrollably. She clutched Matteo against her chest, unable to process what had happened. Adrian stood motionless. He looked from the shattered plate to the frightened mother and child. His entire life had been shaped by control, calculation, and guarded distance. Yet survival had come through pure chaos and through people society barely noticed. Polis questioned staff for hours. Curtis eventually confessed. News spread quickly. Headlines focused on the assassination attempt against the deaf millionaire, but Adrian found himself thinking less about danger and more about the woman whose terrified eyes he could not forget. A few days later, he requested hotel records. He learned about Marisol, widowed, overworked, near eviction. No criminal history, no manipulation, just survival. The information unsettled him. He realized how easily her life could have been ruined that night despite her innocence. So Adrian made a decision few expected. He asked to meet her. Marisol almost refused. She feared publicity and misunderstanding. Wealthy people rarely entered struggling lives without hidden condition. But financial desperation and gratitude eventually persuaded her. Their meeting took place inside Adrian's office overlooking the city skyline. She arrived nervous and apologetic. Mateo rested quietly in her arms. Communication required patience. Adrian used signing and written tablets, while an interpreter assisted when necessary. At first, the room felt formal and distant. Then Adrian surprised her. Instead of discussing lawsuits or publicity, he asked about her life. No one had asked sincerely in a very long time, and so, carefully, Marisol told the truth. She spoke about grief after losing her husband, about choosing between rent and groceries, about working through illness because absence meant unemployment, about carrying exhaustion so heavy she sometimes cried silently while Mateo slept. Adrian listened. Really listened, not as a businessman. As a man remembering his own mother, he saw echoes of sacrifice that money had erased from his memory, but never from his heart. Something inside him shifted. Days later, Adrian quietly paid Marisol's overdue rent and established an educational and living trust for Mateo. But he did more than provide money. He offered her stable employment within one of his foundations with childcare support and fair hours. Marisol cried when she learned the truth, not because charity had arrived, but because dignity had. For Adrian, however, the greater transformation surprised even himself. He began visiting the foundation regularly. Mateo recognized him immediately each time. The child who had once shattered his dinner plate now crawled into his lap without hesitation. And for perhaps the first time in decades, Adrian laughed without guarding himself. He discovered something painful. His loneliness had not come from deafness. It had come from fear. Fear of dependence. Fear of betrayal. Fear of opening doors that loss might later slam shut. Yet healing entered his life disguised as inconvenience and accident. Months passed. The media, eventually, lost interest. Busyness continued. But Adrian's world no longer revolved entirely around wealth. He funded programs for struggling single parents and expanded employment initiatives for people with disabilities, not for reputation, for remembrance, because one impossible night had shown him how invisible people often carried the greatest humanity. Before this story reaches its ending, we have a special request for you. Comment the word kindness below if you believe one small act can change an entire life. Nearly a year later, Adrian hosted a quiet dinner at the same hotel. No reporters, no executives, only a small table near the windows where rain once fell against loneliness. This time, he was not alone. Marisol sat nearby, no longer wearing exhaustion like armor. Mateo, now walking unsteadily, wandered between them with joyful confidence. The hotel staff remembered the night that changed everything. And as Adrian watched the child who had unknowingly saved him, he realized something extraordinary. Millions had built his success, but love, gratitude, and connection had rebuilt his soul. Near the end of dinner, Mateo toddled toward Adrian and placed a tiny hand over his. The millionaire could not hear the room. He never would. Yet in that quiet moment, surrounded not by power but by human warmth, Adrian felt something louder than sound. He felt home. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that miracles sometimes arrive through ordinary people, please like, comment, and share this video. Subscribe to the channel so more stories of hope and humanity can reach hearts around the world. Some people spend their entire lives searching for greatness in grand places. But sometimes greatness crawls across a polished floor, overturns what we thought mattered, and teaches us that the richest life is not measured by money, but by the people who help us remember how to feel again.